Welcome back to the channel, everybody. In today's video we're going to be looking at these Victorian children. Now, there were millions of children throughout this era, and not all of them had the same social standing. Some of them were wealthy, some of them were poor, and some of them were even worse. They were known as street children, and we're going to give you an understanding of all of them. Now, of course, I'm going to represent the wealthy children. Of course I am. Look at the way that I'm dressed. I just ooze wealth and privilege. And my friend here, he's going to represent the poorer end of childhood. And together we're going to give you an understanding of what it was like as children in the Victorian era. Life for Victorian children was nothing like childhood is today. For the wealthy, there was an overwhelming sense of boredom and a constant prod to be proper and polite with very little parent-to-child communication. For the poor Victorian children, life was much different. The poor children had to work public jobs for their families to survive. So toys were nothing more than handmade dolls and wooden blocks. But on the other hand, their family lives were much tighter knit and more loving. So let me first start by talking to you about the wealthy side of childhood. So whilst the wealthy children may have been spoiled and had much better lives than the poorer children, they also had what seemed to be quite sad, redundant and affectionateless existences. So children were mostly raised by nannies who would teach the children what was proper and what was not. Day-to-day living was nothing more than loneliness, routine and being formal all the time. So rich Victorian children very rarely communicated with their parents except for specific times and occasions during the day. So Winston Churchill once said that he could count the times he was hugged by his mother as a child, which that's pretty sad, that, to be fair. So parents would hire nannies or nurses to do the brunt of the child rearing. They would instruct the nanny on what they wanted installed into their children, such as manners, education, propriety, how to dress, and so on. The nanny was effectively a substitute parent. Now, when we think of nannies in Victorian times, we often naturally think of a cheerful, loving young lady who went to a local community college, got a degree in something like child development. But for the most part, the reality was very, very different. Nannies were usually older women that had never been married, and you can imagine that there was a little bit of a chip on their shoulder towards children, since in those days not being married meant not having children, and many times nannies were intolerant and very strict and sometimes just plain old mean. Now, albeit there were some nannies who were actually kind and did care about the children and did provide them with loving experiences, such as trying to brighten the day up of a child by playing a game with them or maybe fixing them a special meal for their birthday. So, oh, come on, it's your turn, come on, get in. Thank you. Oh, hi there. Okay, so the poor Victorian children lived a very different life to the children of wealthy families. They didn't have the nice big houses to live in with the extravagant toys and clothes and food that the rich kids had. They had to live in smaller houses, and often they lived in one room. Now, living in these tight quarters caused families to be much closer, and without the presence of a nanny, parents raised their children and were the guiding force in their lives. Now, this didn't always translate into a more loving environment, since a large part of poor children had to go and work public jobs to support the family, and many parents often saw their children as income, and this is why people sent their children out to work. And it was always a possibility that parents might have 10, 12 or even more children for this very reason. Now, how old did children have to be to work in Victorian times? So come on, Mr. Snooty, you get back in here and tell them. Okay, so Victorian children would be made to go to work at a very young age. As unbelievable as this sounds, even aged 4 and 5 years old. But actually, it wasn't unique to the Victorian age. Children had always been expected to go out to work for many centuries before. So they worked very hard and for very long hours each day. And on job safety, well, that wasn't really a major concern. And they were expected to work in filthy conditions pretty much all the time. They really had no choice. Their parents needed them to work to pay the bills. So what type of jobs did children do? Well, here's the thing. There was always work for children. Children were considered cheap labour in the Victorian times, and children were in high demand for many types of jobs such as mining, factory work, street sweeper, clothing and hat making, chimney sweeps, farmers, textile mills, servants, and even prostitution, sorry to say. As you may have already noticed, the British had a very little regard when it came to children. So here we go. You'll be best for this part. Come on in. Come on. Come on. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, sir. Okay. Hello again. Okay, so what conditions did children have to work in? So mill working conditions for children in the Victorian age were truly dreadful. Health and Safety and Health at Work Acts, or anything that faintly resembled any organisation for safe working conditions, simply didn't exist. The Factory Act, which was established in 1833, disallowed children under the age of 9 from working in factories, but it didn't apply to any other industries. So between the ages of 5 and 9, children would climb up chimneys and they would be covered from head to toe in soot. Their arms, their legs, their heads, their backs, their feet would all be bleeding, and they would simply be wiped up with a bit of water and salt and sent straight back up another chimney. So children working in factories worked in dangerous situations for long hours, 14 to 18 hours a day. Occupational deaths were often common as working children were sent into dangerous situations. Their small bodies were ideal for crawling in and around and under dangerous machinery, and sometimes the machines were kept running as they didn't want to hinder production. I mean, who would stop a machine for the safety of a child? Not me, apparently. Okay, so Victorian street children. Street children in Victorian times were found in abundance, living in alleyways and side streets. Many were orphans, but large parts of street children were from neglected alcoholic families where abuse was the norm. Faced with the choice of living in these conditions or living on the streets, some of the children chose the streets. Now, many of these children fell prey to prostitution and they had to be a thief to support themselves. Others became street sellers or actually worked public jobs just like other children. So there we are, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us in this video about Victorian children. Now, one of the things I would like you to do in the comments below is please tell me what job you had when you were younger. What was your first ever job? I'll tell you mine. So when I was 16 years old, living here in England, I worked at a superstore or a big shop called Morrison's. And guess what? I was simply a shelf stacker. And that was it. I worked Thursdays and I worked Sundays, and it was around 14 hours a week. And as you can imagine, it got boring pretty fast. But that was me. That was my first job. What was your first job? Put it in the comments, and always have an amazing day. Thanks for watching.